I was thinking maybe for people who haven't done or don't have much background in lattice-based problems, if you could just give it like a really brief outline, like touch on the SAS problem and how
Sure.
you're using that in your paper.
Sure. Yeah. So the SIS problem is really one of the most foundational lattice problems. It was first defined in 1996, but really is even older than that. It just wasn't really named or studied in the same way. So it's a problem that you can use to build a lot of different kinds of crypto systems. You can build ordinary commitment schemes. You can build collision-resistant hash functions. You can build a lot of you can build symmetric key cryptography out of it. You can do a fair number of things. We don't know how to do public key cryptography from the SIS problem, but we rather public key encryption, I should say, public key encryption. But we can do a lot of public key digital signatures. We can do public key commitments and things like that. So the problem, kind of very simply stated, is if you're given a lattice from a certain family, randomly selected from a certain family, that it's hard to find a short non-zero vector in that lattice. And short is quantified. It's kind of a tunable parameter. And so basically, based on the meaning of short, or how short you consider to be short, we can define a family of lattices. Very easy to generate a random lattice from this family. And the SIS assumption is that it's hard to find a short non-zero vector in a random lattice drawn from this family. And that's one way of looking at it. It has a very clean kind of syntactic definition. So if you don't know anything about lattices, it's fine. We can actually define the problem in just like 2 lines. If you go to page 7, the top of page 7 of our paper, the functional commitments paper, the problem basically is if we select a uniformly random matrix, you can think of this matrix as being sort of having n rows and many more columns. So it's kind of a wide, flat shaped matrix. Then the goal is to find a short vector in the kernel of that matrix, or a short vector where the matrix times the vector equals 0, essentially. And the arithmetic is done modulo a small number q, but that doesn't much matter for the concept. So we're just looking for a short vector in the kernel of some randomly selected matrix. And this is a very well-studied problem. A lot of people have attempted to give algorithms for it. There are a few different, there's just 2 or 3 different kind of algorithmic approaches to this, but all the algorithmic approaches for this problem have very poor runtimes. They take a lot of computation, they take a lot of runtime. We don't have anything near efficient to attack this kind of problem. So kind of much like the discrete log problem in classical cryptography, it's a very well-studied problem. And it has one nice thing about it, it has these kind of tunable parameters, and you can adjust the level of difficulty. You can adjust what is considered short or not considered short. And by relaxing those notions somewhat, you can get all kinds of extra, or you can use that to build all kinds of extra features and functionality properties of your commitment schemes or your hash functions or whatever it is that you're building from it. Yeah, so was that a helpful introduction to it?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was wondering how that the sort of the tuning of the parameters that plays in the gadget matrix that you're using.
Yes.
You mentioned in the paper you could use different that can be parameterized differently in different situations. Like, yeah, how would that? How does that work?
Sure. Yeah. There are a lot of different trade-offs that you can make with the gadget. The kinds of trade-offs that it allows are, well, so SIS has 3 parameters, really. Well, 4 actually, but 3 main parameters. One is the modulus. So how big are the entries of the matrix? Like, what's their bit length, or how, are they between 0 and 100? Are they between 0 and 1,000? Are they between 0 and 1,000,000? So that's one parameter. The other parameter is just the dimensions of the matrix, how many rows and how many columns are in the matrix. And then the third parameter is the threshold for what is considered to be a short solution, right? So, we're saying, oh, a solution is supposed to say a times x equals 0, and x is supposed to be short. It has, its norm should be less than some threshold beta. And the smaller you make that threshold, the harder the problem becomes. But for our purposes, with all these functional commitments and so forth, we need to allow the threshold to be somewhat large. So depending on how rich of a function class you want to support, the threshold of the SIS problem needs to be increased. And that makes the SIS problem somewhat easier. And you can compensate for that by increasing the dimensions of the matrix. Okay, so that's just a preface to this question about the gadget, which is the gadget is sort of influenced by, controlled by, its efficiency is determined by the parameters, right? It's determined by the dimension of the SIS problem that you're using. It's influenced by the size of the entries of your matrices, right? So larger entries, between 0 and 1,000,000 or 0 and 1,000,000,000, what have you. Larger entries mean the gadget is somewhat less efficient or has to use larger dimensions. And then the bound, the SIS shortness threshold also can be affected by the exact choice of gadget. So if you look at the page 8, in the last paragraph of page 8, in our paper, we just fixed upon one kind of very standard, simple choice of gadget, this powers of 2 gadget, where the entries are 1, 2, 4, 8, all the way up to basically Q. All right, so we need log base 2 of Q entries in this gadget. And Q is controlled or affected by the level of functionality that our commitment scheme will support. So the larger Q becomes, the more dimensions you need for this gadget, right? And the dimension of the gadget grows like log of Q. There are other options. You don't have to use the powers of 2 gadget. You could use powers of 3 or powers of 7 or whatever you like. And the effect on that would be to lower the dimension. The dimension of the gadget would then become log base 7 of Q rather than log base 2 of Q. So you can get some pretty significant space savings by reducing the gadget dimension in this way. It comes at some expense. It comes at the expense of a larger base in the gadget implies that you need to use a somewhat larger shortness threshold in your SIS problem. So it's a trade-off, right? You can make the dimension smaller at a cost of a somewhat larger shortness threshold, and then the shortness threshold kind of determines the security level of your SIS problem. So larger shortness threshold means you may need to crank up the parameters somewhere else to compensate for security. And so there's kind of a multi-dimensional optimization problem that you can think about here. What base should I use for my gadget, and how hard are the associated SIS problems, and so forth. Yes.
I mean, that's going to affect the size of the commitment then as well, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it'll affect sizes of the commitments, sizes of the proofs. And you can see also on page 3.1, I'm sorry, on page 8, equation 3.1. So it's just a little bit up from the bottom. To give you an idea, so if we look at the left-hand side of this, we have C minus some representation of X tensored with the gadget there. So the larger the dimension of the gadget, the dimension of C has to match, right? It has to grow in concert. And if the gadget dimension is smaller, then also the C is smaller, right? So in dimension, that is. And so that C is the size of the public parameters. On the right-hand side of the equation, we have C sub F. C sub F is the size of an actual commitment to function F. And again, its size sort of has to match or is proportional to the dimension of the gadget. So if you notice that we're taking CF minus some representation, tensored G. So the larger the dimension of G, the larger the dimension of CF in proportion. So yeah, that would be a good reason to maybe use a lower dimensional gadget and pay a little bit pay for it in the shortness bound and make up for that in the security by just increasing the other dimensions slightly.
So in like section 4, I didn't see if you had any sort of data on some of the proof sizes, for example.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, we have. Let's see. So what can we say here? There are a lot of options, right? So if you wanted to work out concrete sizes of things, you'd need to go through a few steps. The first step you'd have to work out is, what's the level of functionality that I want to support, right? So do I want to just support, key value commitments, key value tables, or as we call them, key value commitments, right? Or do I want to support accumulators, right? Or do I want to support polynomial commitments? So all of the choice of how much functionality you want, or the class of functionality that you want, that choice will determine the shortness bound. Okay, so I believe it's in, if you look in theorem, I'm trying to find it. So the security theorem is in section 325 on page 14. So theorem 3.7.
yeah, I can show my screen if you want as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, let's see. So what I wanted to point out was just that this is the security theorem. It's assuming that the SIS problem is hard for a certain norm-bound beta, right? So it says beta equals 2W kappa plus N. These are pieces of the, and the kappa here is determined by the level of functionality in for the class of functions that you want the commitment scheme to support. Excuse me. So we give some bounds for kappa in that later section 4, right? For example, on page 17, equation 4.3 says that kappa for the kind of equality testing class of functions is less than or equal to k times w, where we're testing, I think, on k bits, something like this. Yeah, equality testing k bit strings. So if you look, alternatively, if you look a little farther down on, let's say, I think we give a different kappa bound somewhere. Okay, so if you look at lemma 4.3 on page 20, there's a different bound for kappa for a different richer class of polynomial commitments. So there, we have kappa has to be kappa mul to the k plus 1 times kappa add to the k, something like that. These aren't really super optimized bounds, but they give you a sense of how the functionality that is supported translates to the SIS bound via this kappa parameter. So yeah, as I was saying, the process would be decide which functionality you want, figure out what the associated kappa is, and that tells you the norm bound of that's going to be relevant for the SIS problem. Right? And at that point, you would say, okay, well, my SIS norm bound is going to be whatever it is, a billion, trillion, something like that. And then I need to finally set SIS parameters that are going to make it a hard problem for such a permissive norm bound, right? So given that the norm bound is this, I need to set my SIS dimensions to be, n equals this and m equals that and whatever they need to be. And then that'll give me, 100 bits of security or 150 bits of security, whatever you're looking for. So that would be the process of really instantiating this for a specific class of interest.
Great, thanks. Also, I was wondering, you kind of leave it as an open question, like where we'd have to go from here to get to SNARKs with this sort of scheme, and also, yeah, why the ACL paper, where that's falling short, where there's improvements in this paper.
Right. Yeah. So I would say the upshot on that is there's sort of two parallel tracks of works that are being done now. So ACL Plus was a big kind of breakthrough in terms of here's, we can get kind of full-fledged SNARKs from problems that are somehow related to lattices. It's a new and ad hoc assumption. It's sort of invented for the purpose of being able to build the SNARKs that they build. And it's quite complex, right? So there's a lot of moving parts in it, and the attacker gets a lot of information, including various short vectors in certain lattices, but it's got the challenge is to find short vectors in some related lattices. And so we don't, I don't think anybody would say that we have a very good grasp on is that problem, is the assumption really valid? Is the problem really hard, or is it as hard as we might think? Maybe there's some attack against this problem because it was just invented. The problem was just invented a year ago. So these are, in some respect, in order to get a SNARK, you have to make very aggressive assumptions because there are these sort of lower bounds, right? Gentry-Wicks and other results that say you kind of need some kind of knowledge assumption, or you can't use a falsifiable assumption in order to get full-fledged SNARKs. So it's sort of the price of admission, right? And when you want to build a SNARK, you have to be willing to make some aggressive security assumptions. For weaker notions like functional commitments, what our work shows is that you don't necessarily have to make extremely aggressive assumptions. In fact, you can make very standard assumptions. You can make some of the most well-studied lattice assumptions and still get functional commitments out of them. And then there was the other paper on your reading list. There've been a couple works that came out concurrently with ours, which are sort of somewhere in between. They're building things like functional commitments, but also out of ad hoc, new fresh assumptions that would require scrutiny. And the techniques have some similarities and a lot of differences. So there's sort of some overlap in sort of how the schemes work exactly, but also many significant differences owing to the nature of the assumption that they're making and owing to the efficiency properties that the different systems have.
Great,
So
thanks.
yeah, I'd be happy to take any like follow-up questions about any of those topics, because it was quite a lot. I just sort of breezed over a lot of things at once.
Sure, I'll leave it if anyone has any questions.
I have a quick question regarding whether, if you move from standard LWE to ring LWE here, whether there's, whether it's straightforward.
Yeah, it is. So we can go from SIS to ring SIS, which is sort of, it's a weaker assumption than ring LWE, because SIS is a weaker assumption than LWE is. The transformation is very straightforward and standard. Lots of the prior work about ring variants of problems kinds of shows you the mechanical transformation or mechanical translation that you can take. But the high level picture is that every time we have some, we have these matrices C and CF and so forth, right? In our scheme, and these are just completely unstructured matrices. They're rectangular and all the entries are sort of unrelated to each other. The translation into the ring setting is to say every sort of square submatrix of C or CF or any square submatrix of any matrix in the system is sort of replaced, goes from being totally unstructured to having some kind of rotational symmetry or corresponding to a polynomial instead of an arbitrary square matrix. And so with that insight and kind of going through the mechanical process, you can save a factor of about n, so about the number of rows in our matrices. Right? All our matrices in the system have the same number of rows, which is called n. So you can save a factor of about n in all the sizes of all the objects, all the public parameters, commitment size, proof size, etc. You can save a factor of n in the running time of committing, of proving, of verifying, any other operations that are involved. So it just kind of gives you an across the board n factor improvement in all the respects that you would care about.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I should say, I guess I have a few more thoughts about the SNARK question. I think that if you look at ACL Plus and other papers that have been kind of looking at similar topics, they work in a kind of two-stage fashion, and it's very analogous to the way that SNARKs in the bilinear pairing world also work. There's a lot of parallels. So the way they generally work is, they kind of build some kind of commitment scheme that supports just enough functional, has just enough functional properties or just enough homomorphic properties to support some basic level of functionality in the commitment scheme. And then and those commitment schemes and their functionalities can be shown to be secure and sound under relatively ordinary assumptions, right? So like KZG commitments or other polynomial commitments or things like that, you can base those on fairly standard looking assumptions, nothing exotic like unfalsifiable knowledge assumptions, or you don't need any of that stuff. So that gets you a functional commitment scheme of some expressivity. And so that's really on a solid foundation. And then you sort of add on the R1CS verification aspect of it, or the knowledge. You kind of add on a knowledge assumption to these additionally, and those allow you to get all the way to SNARKs. So with that last step being the much more kind of aggressive or speculative assumption coming into the picture, gets you the last mile and all the way to SNARKs. So what I think would be really cool, and we've thought about it from time to time, but there's not a great I don't have any like promising news to tell you about this, but I think it would be cool to have a similar kind of two-step process where we build an appropriately useful kind of functional commitment scheme out of a standard assumption like SIS, right? Something we can really bank on and feel good about. And then for that also to be somehow amenable to the last mile of adding on some knowledge assumption, maybe some LWE knowledge assumption or something of that nature, which gets you then all the way to SNARKs. I think that would be really cool if that were to work out. We have done a functional commitment scheme based on SIS here, but as we talk about in the paper, as it is presently, it's sort of not, doesn't seem particularly amenable to adding on a knowledge assumption and getting all the way to SNARKs. And sort of the reason is just it's possible to construct commitments where you don't really know the form or shape of the commitment of the function that you've committed to. So you can sort of cook up, it's very easy in our scheme to cook up a commitment that doesn't necessarily correspond to a function of any particular structure or shape or form. And that's something that in the bilinear pairing world, it seems that those functional commitments you really can plausibly assume that in order to create a good looking commitment, it really has to be a commitment to a certain kind of structure function or something of that nature. So that's a gap. That's something that's sort of missing here, where we can say, okay, you've created a commitment, you can't equivocate on it, you can't lie about what's in it, but you also can't convince anybody that it really has the necessary structured function inside of it.
A follow-up question to that. So are polynomials not as efficient in this particular type of SIS-based commitment? And if you were to guess, like what type of like function classes would support general SNARKs yet be more efficient?
Yeah. So the polynomial commitment is a good example to talk about a little more concretely, right? We have polynomial commitments in this paper. We can implement them, using these techniques. But what does it mean? Like, what are the actual properties we get out of it? We get the property that the honest party can commit to a polynomial and can prove different evaluations of that polynomial, right? It can open different values of the polynomial and convince a skeptical verifier that these are the evaluations of the polynomial. Okay, so that's what an honest party can do. But when it comes to the security property, what can we, what can and can't an adversary do? So an adversary can also present a commitment to you, and it can present you with a proof or a commitment to some function, right? Some function f or polynomial p, and it can convince you that f of x really is y and f of x prime really is y prime and so forth. But it does not give a convincing proof that this function f really is a polynomial of degree 3 or 7 or whatever, right? This committed function f may be not a polynomial at all. the only thing the verifier can be sure of is that there is a specific function. There is a function inside this commitment that cannot be opened in two different ways, right? You can't equivocate on it, but it does not convince you that there actually is a degree D polynomial inside. So that's sort of one of the most important qualitative differences between polynomial commitments that do lend themselves to SNARKs, right? Do take that last step to SNARKs, and what we've got here. So if we could bridge that gap, that would be very cool. I think that would be probably the most important step toward getting ultimately to SNARKs. Alternatively, we may just have to take a completely different paradigm. There's a lot of parallels between the pairing-based world and lattice world. You can draw a lot of inspiration from it, but many of the paradigms or many of the techniques don't have clear parallels or clear translations, and we've had to invent very different styles of constructing and proving cryptographic objects that don't really have any clear parallel.
Do you have any ideas on you have this dependency on the size of the function input in the new scheme, right?
Yes. Yeah.
In your last paper, that was this dependency.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any ideas how you could sort of combine take some ideas from the last paper to avoid the dependency?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that has really bothered me for some time. I'd like to get the best of both worlds. So just to give the context in a little more detail, our previous paper with Zach and with Chad from TCC 21, I think, maybe 22. Okay, either 21 or 22, but it's about vector commitments and functional commitments. In that one, the sizes of the proofs did not really grow with the size of the function description, right? And so that was good, right? You'd like to have proofs that are small, even for very complex, rich functions or very large function descriptions. But the price of that was that you needed a sort of a trusted online authority who could produce these opening keys for you and so forth. And it's not a very compelling model to have to work in. So in this more recent paper, we are only using a transparent setup, right? There's no authority, nobody even has to generate a structured random string, no toxic waste or anything like that. However, the size of the public parameters, the sort of width of the matrix, is proportional to the size of the function description. So if you want to commit to polynomials, for example, of degree D, then such polynomials have D coefficients, and the description length of the polynomial grows linearly with D. So the larger the degree, the bigger are the public parameters, and also the bigger are the proofs. So a proof for polynomial of degree D is also going to have a size that's proportional to D, growing proportional to D. Whereas in the earlier paper, it would be the size of the proofs would be independent of D. So I think it's a great question. I go back and forth about whether it's plausible or not to hope for either a lesser dependence or no dependence at all on the function size. I'll mention the paper by David Wu and Ho-Tech Wee, or Wee and Wu. I think does not have such a dependence, or maybe only has like a polylog dependence on the function description. And that comes really from the more aggressive new ad hoc assumption that they make. So kind of if you make up an assumption that allows you to aggregate these things down or squeeze them down, then yeah, thanks for the link. Then you can get smaller proof sizes, but at the price of a more aggressive assumption, or as in our previous paper, at the price of a much more involved setup. So I think it would be great, and maybe with trusted setup, but under a standard assumption, you could hope to get smaller proof sizes. I think that would be a good problem to try to tackle. Thought about it a little bit, and I don't have any great ideas yet, but I wouldn't be shocked if somebody came up with a cool idea that made this possible. I'd love to see it.
Great, thanks. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I have one more kind of.
Great.
Maybe I should have asked this one first, but I guess really when we're thinking about like lattice-based SNARKs, is the only pretty much the primary motivation for post-quantum security, or plausibly we could have more efficient SNARKs? Like,
yeah,
from everything I see at the moment, it doesn't seem like we're going to gain in efficiency.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect, at least in the near term, to get anything that's more efficient, especially in terms of size. Lattice-based primitives are not particularly standing out in a good way due to sizes, right? Like ciphertexts are bigger and so forth. Where we do get benefits frequently are in terms of functionality, right? So like fully homomorphic encryption is only something we know how to get from lattices. And that has all kinds of really great applications. And then I would also say, even though sizes are not great, the running times are frequently attractive. So, if you look at the actual computation times for lattice-based encryption and verification of signatures and things, they're very fast, even much faster than pairing-based schemes, things like that. So you could hope to get cheap but not small, right? Fast but not small operations out of these things, and that might also play into prover times as well, right? Your proof times could potentially be faster if many open problems were solved and optimizations were done. Yeah, can you remind me of post-quantum, right? Post-quantum, definitely a major motivation. One thing about post-quantum, we think about post-quantum often in the context of encryption because of this store now and decrypt later type of scenario, right? As soon as you encrypt something and put it out of the network, you are potentially allowing it to be decrypted by a future quantum computer, right? And people tend not to worry quite as much about things like signatures for this reason, because if I'm verifying a signature now, before quantum computers become large scale, I know that signature is really legitimate. It couldn't have been forged by a quantum computer in 2023. When it comes to proofs, I think that arguably there's a little bit of signature, the signature story applies there, but also there's also maybe a more important long-term story, especially when you think about on blockchains and things of that nature, where these proofs have to remain sound and trustworthy and believable, potentially way out into the far future. And if quantum computers do emerge at a large scale, and they're suddenly able to start forging SNARK proofs, due to some, quantum vulnerability, you have a problem, right? You have a significant problem. And maybe these proofs could be backdated or something like that, and inserted in history or used to change history of a chain, right? If people could be used to fork the history of a chain. So I think there is in this realm a sort of higher priority or a more urgency, let's say, to get and start using post-quantum secure proofs so that we don't have these sort of retrospective attacks in the future, for example.